Good morning and welcome back. My name is Robin Woolmer and I'm from ASQ Vancouver. I'm the chair of the 2020 ASQ Western Canada Quality and Business Excellence Conference. Our theme is Rethink Opportunities, United in Change. We've run a successful face-to-face conference in Vancouver for the past 7 years, and we were planning an 8th. Then COVID hit. Like many of you, we came to a crossroads. We had to decide whether to stop everything and wait until the virus was over, or rethink opportunities and embrace the change. United, we put a plan together to go virtual. And virtual allowed us to rethink opportunities again. We've attracted speakers from all over the world and an audience from all over the world. We've also reached out to the section chairs in Western Canada and rebranded the conference as the first ever ASQ Western Canada Conference. This year, it is being hosted by ASQ Vancouver, but united in change, we hope that this will become an annual event. For those of you who are new to ASQ, let me tell you a little bit about the organization. Our members are people who are involved in quality. ASQ provides training, resources, and a network of like-minded people who speak our language and help us do better in our jobs. If your role involves quality and continuous improvement, then you should consider joining us. ASQ also provides 17 different certifications, which are well recognized in many industries and services. The organization is headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and operates chapters throughout Canada and the world. In Western Canada, chapters operate in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. In Vancouver, we had a lot of discussions about how to face the conference. We switched to a virtual format for most of our monthly events and had quite a lot of success in presenting programs on Zoom. The thing I think that surprised us the most was that we were no longer serving solely a Vancouver audience. We noticed that we were picking up audience members from all over the world, and we started to realize that we could also pick up speakers from all over the world. This conference is quite unique for us. I believe that we had speakers yesterday from California, Florida, Eastern Canada, and Western Canada. So now I would like to introduce the conference team. You will meet them over the course of the day. Please take some time to thank them via the chat. This year, we were fortunate to partner with the Acsenda School of Management to create the social media content we've been posting on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Acsenda students are also working behind the scenes today to manage the technical aspects of the conference. The conference team has been meeting weekly on Zoom since June. Rethinking opportunities meant brainstorming solutions to problems we didn't know existed a year ago. However, united in change, we believe that we have put together a really interesting conference where the speakers will shine, you will all learn something, and the technology will disappear into the background. Our social media tags are Rethink Opportunities and United in Change. We'd really like to see you post your experiences today on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Much of our success relied on the tremendous support and trust that we got from our sponsors. We really want to thank them for working with us as we moved into this virtual format. A lot of our brainstorming centered around how we could continue to provide value to our sponsors in a virtual format. So please have a look at their websites and learn how they can help us do our jobs better. BSI is the Business Improvement and Standards Company that helps organizations make excellence a habit all over the world. Their business is enabling others to perform better. You can learn more about them at bsigroup.com. Hexagon is a global leader in sensor, softwood, and autonomous solutions. They are putting data to work to boost efficiency, productivity, and quality across industrial, manufacturing, infrastructure, safety, and mobility applications. You can learn more about them at hexagon.com. The Acsenda School of Management is a private post-secondary education institution located in Vancouver. They offer undergraduate degrees in both business administration and hospitality management. You can learn more about them at acsenda.com. But we do want to remind you that this conference is not the end. If we are to remain relevant, our learning needs to be lifelong. So I just want to draw your attention to our next event, which is scheduled for December, and we invite you to register on Eventbrite. And now, without further ado, let's get on to the speakers. We've gathered a broad range of speakers and topics from all over the world. I invite you to take a few moments now to think about what you want to get out of this day, and then listen with intent to the ideas presented. Implement at least one good idea to make the world a better place, and this will be time well spent. Now take a few moments to freshen your coffee and get settled. Back to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Robin. Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Ann Jackson, and I'll be assisting with the technical parts of the presentation today. I'm also pleased to introduce my co-host, Daniela Garcia, who will be assisting me. We will be recording today's session for future viewing, so please keep that in mind. In order to more efficiently manage any questions you may have for our speaker today, Sir John Daniel, please, we'll be using a platform called Slido. We're inserting the link for Slido in the chat now. If you pay close attention to your screen, we'll be doing a quick Slido tutorial. If you want to submit a question, please type it in the question field at the top of the screen. And if you want your name to show, type it in the name field directly below before submitting your question. If you would prefer to remain anonymous, you do not need to enter your name in the name field. At the end of the presentation, during the question and answer session, the screen will be shared and Sir John will be happy to go over your questions. If you like a question, or if your question has already been asked, you can click on the thumbs up icon to the right of the question and it will be prioritized. Also, if you have any technical Zoom problems, please send a direct private message to me, ASQ volunteer Tracy Ann, in the Zoom chat, and I'll be happy to assist you. I will now hand over to the session's moderator, Natella.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. Maybe it's an afternoon or an evening, depending what time zone you are joining us from today. It's really good to see so many of you join us back and return to our second day of the conference. And today I have the honor to present to you our keynote speaker, Sir John Daniel, with his talk on embedding resilience in education in systems and institutions. Sir John has a long list of credentials and achievements. For one thing, he's an honorary fellow of St. Edmund Hall, Oxford University, the College of Preceptors, and the Commonwealth of Learning. Sir John has authored more than 400 publications on topics that range from metallurgy to chemistry to education and distance learning. Currently, he's a Chancellor of the Acsenda School of Management. One thing we learned about him recently is that it took Sir John 25 years to complete his master's degree in education, having started his education in 1970 at the school that was called at the time Sir George Williams University in Montreal. By the time he graduated from the program, the university granting him the degree was already renamed into Concordia University. Before Sir John takes over and graces our virtual stage here with his talk, I'd like to take a moment to thank one more time our event sponsors today, Acsenda School of Management, BSI Standards and Process and Business Improvement Company, as well as Hexagon, the manufacturer of industrial metrology solutions. And now I would like to hand it over to Sir John with his talk on embedding resilience in education systems and institutions. Over to you, Sir John.
Thank you, Nutella. Just let me get my screens organized. There we are. Thank you. Well, good day to you all. It's a great pleasure to address this conference of the American Society for Quality. Most of you, I think, are interested in quality in business, industry, and services. But today I shall be talking about quality in education, particularly education in these peculiar times of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm proud to be the Chancellor of the Acsenda School of Management, and I'm very pleased that they are sponsoring this conference. My title today is Embedding Resilience in Education Systems and Institutions. I need hardly say that education systems and institutions are experiencing turbulent times. The COVID-19 pandemic caught them unawares and unprepared. So around the world, schools and universities had to vacate their buildings and try to teach remotely in a matter of days. In the early months, most institutions coped surprisingly well, although students were often critical of the quality of what they were receiving, and parents were sometimes alarmed. So educators must treat this experience as an incentive to develop greater resilience for dealing with either continuing waves of COVID-19 or other crises that they may face in future. And they must also ensure that the quality of what they offer in crises is at least as good as in normal times. Now, the experience of emergency remote teaching showed that online teaching is generally not effective for elementary school pupils. Creating resilient systems for them means having arrangements ready for teaching in smaller groups or moving to other facilities. And the same applies broadly to secondary schools, although older pupils can handle some online learning if they're well supported. First year post-secondary students need orientation to help them adapt to higher education, but can cope with some online learning, although most will miss the social aspects of living away from home, often for the first time, and being on a campus with other students. I think it's fair to say that British Columbia has dealt with the health, educational and economic impacts of COVID-19 better than most jurisdictions, at least so far. And this is because our impressive provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, has relied on evidence and science and favoured frequent and transparent TV briefings and exhortations in order to avoid blanket lockdowns. Nevertheless, some of the recent surge in COVID-19 infections worldwide has now reached BC. She has therefore announced some new restrictions, which she has been able to target carefully because she knows where people are getting infected thanks to extensive and thorough contact tracing. Her priority is to keep schools open and small businesses functioning, and to do this, she has now restricted social gatherings of all types. The schools have put in place arrangements to continue in-person learning with appropriate physical distancing, mask wearing, and cleaning. And this seems to be working because little transmission is occurring in schools. In this talk, I shall concentrate on post-secondary education because that is where the challenges are greatest. Our own Acsenda School of Management here in Vancouver followed a trajectory similar to many universities and colleges around the world. In March, when COVID-19 struck, we had to vacate the campus and move operations online. And we stayed online for the summer term. And you can find an article about this published in the Journal of Learning for Development on my website. This fall, we moved to a mixed regime where classes were split in two. One half spent 2 weeks on campus and then switched to online. The other half did the opposite. However, with the new restrictions, we had to vacate the campus again 2 weeks ago and move online. This is a good example of what I mean by embedding resilience. We heard 2 weeks ago that a vaccine may be available in the new year. Nevertheless, institutions would be wise not to jettison their online capabilities just yet. Many months ago, Cambridge University was one of many institutions that played it safe and announced that it would operate online until the summer of 2021. And other institutions, like Acsenda, may find themselves switching between online and classroom teaching several times before COVID-19 is just a memory. Today, my focus is on resilience. And in the context of universities, I interpret this to mean developing a capacity to operate at a distance at short notice. I mean in particular, being able to offer students online learning that they judge to be effective and engaging. In other words, a system that is better than emergency remote teaching. So in the rest of this talk, I shall share the lessons that I've learned from nearly 50 years of involvement in open, distance, and online learning. We tend to make distance and online education sound very complicated, but it's not. So here is the plan of my talk. First, what are we aiming to do? The fundamental aims of our education systems are to expand access, to improve quality, and to lower the costs. And these three vectors of access, quality, and cost can be represented by a triangle. But it is an iron triangle. With conventional methods of classroom teaching, it is impossible to stretch the triangle and pursue these three aims simultaneously. But using technology does make this possible. Cost-effective education of quality can be offered without making it exclusive. I shall present guiding principles to help institutions offer open distance learning, which I abbreviate as ODL, of quality to large numbers of students at low cost. Second, moving to the how, good education requires students to engage in a mixture of independent and interactive learning activities. Using technology enables institutions to offer a blend of synchronous and asynchronous experience to meet these needs while keeping costs down. And finally, quality distance and online learning has three key components: learning materials, student support, and administration. This can be represented as a three-legged stool, and each leg must be strong to support the student in successful learning. Let me now explore these three concepts in turn, and I start with the iron triangle. As I said, throughout history, education systems have aspired to three objectives: access to be as wide as possible, quality to be as high as possible, and cost to be as low as possible. And the nature of this challenge is clear when you represent these aims as a triangle of vectors. And with traditional methods of face-to-face teaching, this is an iron triangle, because you want to stretch the triangle like this to give greater access, higher quality, and lower costs, but you can't. Try extending access by packing more students into each classroom, and you will be accused of damaging quality. Try improving quality with better learning resources, and the cost will go up. Try cutting costs, and you will endanger both access and quality. This iron triangle has hindered the expansion of education throughout history, and it has created in the public mind an insidious link between quality and exclusivity. And this link still drives the admission policies of some universities, which define their quality essentially by the people that they exclude. But today there is good news. Thanks to globalization, successive waves of technology are sweeping the world, and technology can transform the iron triangle into a flexible triangle. Using technology, you can achieve wider access, higher quality, and lower cost, all at the same time. This is a revolution. It has never happened before. So how does it work? The fundamental principles of technology were articulated 2 centuries ago by the Scottish economist Adam Smith, and they are division of labor, specialization, economies of scales, and the use of machines and information and communications technology. In my 1996 book, which resulted from the thesis that Nutella told you it took me 25 years to complete. In this book, Mega Universities and Knowledge Media, Technology Strategies for Higher Education, I invented the term mega university for distance teaching universities that enrolled over 100,000 students. And at that time, 1996, the world counted 11 mega universities in the countries listed here. And their combined enrollment at that time was just short of 3 million students. Now, the population of Canada is too small to support a mega university, and anyway, education in Canada tends to operate by province. However, Canada does have 2 distance teaching universities, Université TELUC for Francophones and Athabasca University for Anglophones. They were established in the 1970s, and I worked for both of those institutions during that decade. In relation to the populations they served, both universities did operate at scale. For example, the TELUC's opening course, which was about the cooperative movement, enrolled 3,000 students in its first offering. Today, I'm going to use the example of the UK Open University, which I had the honor to lead for 11 years. This is an institution that has stretched the Iron Triangle. The UKOU, created in 1969, was the first distance university to operate at scale using modern technologies. And its purpose is expressed in the slogan, open to people, open to places, open to methods, and open to ideas. Since its creation, over 2 million learners have taken modules, certificates, diplomas, degrees, higher apprenticeships, master's degrees, and doctorates from it. And today, with 170,000 students and 13 million learners visiting OpenLearn, its online website, the UKOU has dramatically widened access. It also offers high quality. England's teaching quality assessment system ranked the Open University 5th out of 100 universities, and it topped government surveys of student satisfaction for several years running, and did this while operating at lower costs per student and lower costs per graduate than conventional universities. So what is the secret of doing open distance and online learning successfully? The secret is to offer students a blend of 2 modes of study. And you can use 2 sets of terms for them, independent and interactive study, or synchronous and asynchronous study. These 2 pairs are not exactly the same, but they're closely related, and it is useful to distinguish between them. So I start with independence and interaction. As has been mentioned, at the start of my career, when I was teaching at the École Polytechnique of the Université de Montréal, I enrolled in a part-time master's course in educational technology at what was then Sir George Williams University. The whole experience was very formative and enlightening, but the highlight was the 3-month internship that the program required, and that was a life-changing experience. I spent it at the UK Open University, then in its 2nd year of operation, but already enrolling some 40,000 students. And by the time I rejoined the Open University as Vice-Chancellor 18 years later, it had 100,000 students. And when I left it to go to UNESCO in 2001, the numbers had grown to 200,000. So you will understand why I believe that distance learning of quality and scale go together naturally. But the real issue is access. The mission of the OU, as I said, is to be open to people, open to places, open to methods, and open to ideas. You can study anywhere, and teaching and learning uses various technologies, and the best pedagogical ideas. What was most radical in the UK at that time was that the UKOU interpreted open to people to mean having no academic prerequisites for admission. The basis for admission was first come, first served, up to the numbers that the university could cope with. Now, the cautious civil servants in London who were frightened by this radical process, this radical proposal for a new type of university, had recommended to the first Vice-Chancellor, Walter Perry, that he start with a pilot project of 300 students to test the concept. But Perry, knowing that the success of the Open University would depend on economies of scale and the high quality offerings that scale permitted, ignored the civil servants and admitted a first class of 25,000 and another 15,000 the following year. This is an example of busting open the iron triangle. Technology makes it possible to increase quality and access at lower costs if you work at scale. Scale means wider access, but the social mission of an open university requires that it be wider access to successful study, not just wider access to begin studies. Open admission attracted thousands of adult students with lots of motivation, but some had weak school records, often people whose bad memories of school made them nervous about undertaking higher education. So what did the UKOU do to help thousands of learners overcome their fears of failure and achieve success? At the time of its creation in the 1970s, the UKOU was most famous for its partnership with the BBC, which broadcast the university's course-related TV and radio programs on its regular channels. And this led to jokes about earning a degree by watching telly, although in fact, these programs represented only a small part of the teaching learning system. But unfortunately, broadcasting gave the impression that the UKOU was offering one-way teaching to independent learners. Today, the OU-BBC partnership continues, but it focuses on blockbuster general programming for a global audience of billions. And the arrival of computers and the internet have since provided the UKOU with many more ways of reaching students. But the UKOU understood from the beginning that many of the learners who came through its open doors would require interaction with teachers and other students in order to succeed. So it made large investments in providing a part-time tutor for each group of 25 students. It rented study centers all over the country where these tutors could organize optional tutorial sessions and interact with the students who wished to attend. The students also comment extensively on the students' assignments when they mark them, with staff on the main campus monitoring the quality and helpfulness of this commentary and the appropriateness of the marking. You will understand that this is a massive operation. At the time that I left the UKOU, we had close to 10,000 tutors, whom we called associate lecturers, working for us in this vital function. So I've given just two examples of distance learning. TV and radio programs allow students to learn independently. Meetings between students and tutors are opportunities to learn through interaction with others. Designing any good learning system means creating a judicious mixture of independent and interactive activities. and this is particularly important in distance education. The mixture you choose will depend on the media and facilities that you have available, and also on your resources. A simple rule is that you have lots of students. Independent activities such as TV and audio programs and working on websites have much lower unit costs than interactive activities with other people. But most students require both, which is why you need a balance. Perhaps we can return to this in discussion, because interaction is a rather slippery concept, and I've presented it rather quickly. Boyer Holmberg, who was the great scholar of correspondence education, called correspondence education a guided didactic conversation. He distinguished between the independent activity of studying correspondence texts and interaction with the tutor by mailing an assignment and getting it back sometime later with their comments. Today, some would reserve the term interaction for exchanges that are immediate and in real time. For instance, do you consider that an automated telephone response system is interactive? What about websites with frequently asked questions? But rather getting too fussy about how you define interaction, I suggest that you focus on two things: the cost of providing the activity and its effectiveness for the learner. They say that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, and by analogy, the best judge of whether a learning event is interactive is whether the student judges it to be interactive. Do students get answers to questions that are specific to them? Do the commentaries on the marking of their assignments indicate that another human being has engaged with their work? My second dyad, which is the distinction between synchronous and asynchronous activities, is a useful complement to independence and interaction. And I find it interesting to compare two manifestations of online learning using this yardstick. Earlier this year, universities around the world had to move quickly to online learning. What most did should really have been called emergency remote teaching. Instructors gave their previous classroom lectures online through Zoom and similar platforms in a synchronous fashion, what we call real time. The quality was not wonderful, but it seemed to work, especially if institutions invested in the two other components of successful distance education: student support and good logistics and administration, which I will come to in a minute. So that was one manifestation of online learning. The second is MOOCs, massive open online courses. These created a sensation when they first appeared a decade ago. And as often happens with innovations in educational technology, they were overhyped and misunderstood. Some newspaper articles said that MOOCs were the end of higher education as we knew it. They predicted that a few star professors would displace most of the world's faculty and everyone would learn from home. In the event, not much seemed to change, although millions of people now take MOOCs. I've done 20 of them myself, and I could only take them because they allowed me to study asynchronously. I can study them when I want to and move at the pace that suits me. The favorite of my 20 Future Learn courses was this one from the University of Cape Town in South Africa, What is a Mind? And I see there that some 70,000 people have now taken it. COVID-19 has given a terrific boost to free online courses. In the UK, 1 in 7 adults started a free online course this year, including 32% of those who'd lost their jobs, 20% of those who'd been given temporary leave, and 22% of all 18 to 44-year-olds. These are huge numbers. The UKOU's Open Learn platform hosts almost 1,000 free online courses, and in the past year, it has seen a record 13.6 million visitors, up from 8.9 million the year before. So there is a thirst for accessible online learning. As we move out of the first stage of the educational response to COVID-19, when we crashed into online learning, and into the second, the new normal, whatever that will be, these pairs of concepts, independence and interaction, and synchronicity and asynchronicity, are particularly important. Increasing access to education means allowing learners to do some of their learning independently, which usually means materials that can be studied asynchronously. But making that education effective for most people means giving them opportunities for interaction with other people, teachers and other students, and that interaction will be often, although not always, synchronous. So I now bring all this together in my second conceptual trio, the three-legged stool. Think of the student learning online as seated on a three-legged stool. And the three legs are good learning materials for both synchronous and asynchronous use, student support, academic, administrative, cultural, and social, and efficient administration and logistics. A stool requires all three legs to support the weight put on it. And by analogy, online education only works if all three functions are performed well. If any leg cannot support the weight, the student will fall, that is to say, fail. In this year's rapid transitions to online learning, most effort was invested in learning materials. Professors concentrated on putting their classroom lectures online for synchronous delivery. Now, good materials are, of course, vital to successful distance learning, but also good materials that students can work on asynchronously are a vital complement to synchronous online lectures. And I've just talked about this. So now I shall focus on the other two legs of the stool. During the scramble to go online when COVID-19 hit, I observed how the Acsenda School of Management made the transition successfully. It went well because although the learning materials were mostly synchronous Zoom presentations, Acsenda also gave intense attention to both student support and also to administration and logistics. You can find details about Acsenda's successful transition and the leadership challenges behind it in the publications and presentations on my website. So what do I mean by student support? Student needs support that goes beyond their online group sessions with the professor. And 4 areas where they may need support are academic, administrative, cultural, and social. Clearly, to be successful, students must engage with the academic content of their courses. Many require more help than they will get in the formal online classes. Their first need is for opportunities to ask questions and to be questioned about their understanding of concepts. This can be done by the instructor in one-on-one or small group online sessions. But for a large class, it is probably better done by having part-time tutors hired and trained specifically for this support function, as in the case of the Open University that I mentioned. The second area is administration. When they're on campus, students can usually resolve problems about timetables, program requirements, and so on by going to the relevant office. But when everyone is off campus, this support must be provided through clear information on websites, a friendly helpline, regular email updates, and quick and accurate replies to an exploding volume of email. Then there is cultural support. Undergraduate students in particular look to their campus for exciting cultural activities and for meeting other students. On campus, these often happen informally, but a university operating online has to help organize them, which means using technology to offer events such as trivia quizzes, music nights, and debates. And we found at Acsenda that the student ambassadors, who are specially chosen high-performing senior students, organize some very successful cultural events for their fellow students. And finally, there is social support. Online study and confinement during lockdowns can be very lonely, particularly for new students. They need opportunities to meet each other, if only virtually, and to talk about any personal issues that may be worrying them. Each university has to decide where to draw the line between providing social support itself and making referrals to official psychological and counseling services that some jurisdictions provide through the state or through voluntary organizations. I believe that universities should be careful about taking responsibility for student issues that would better or more properly be dealt with by the state or community social services, or even, of course, by the police. The third leg of the stool is administration and logistics. Some of this will be provided by the learning management system, which must be as user-friendly as possible. For online classes, Acsenda trained the faculty to use both Zoom and Big Blue Button. It was good to have two options, because when universities worldwide switched to emergency remote teaching earlier this year, there was so much pressure on all these platforms that they did sometimes crash. Most of our Acsenda teachers preferred Zoom, but it was good to have a backup. Nothing puts students off distance education faster than systems that don't work, because it makes them feel completely helpless. So effective online operations means having an efficient registry with student management policies that have been translated into smoothly working procedures. This means user-friendly IT systems, but also telephone helplines for students with problems that they may prefer to discuss with a real person, and expect the use of email to explode. So I'm going to finish there and see if you have any questions. I've presented 4 sets of concepts which are key to understanding the why and the how of quality online and distance education. The Iron Triangle shows us why technology can have a revolutionary impact on education. The complementarity of independent and interactive study and synchronous and asynchronous teaching shows us how to develop good pedagogy. And the analogy of the three-legged stool brings it all together as a model for high quality online and distance learning. So I wish you every success. If any of you need to use the technologies of online and distance learning to expand access to successful training in your own organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir John, for this thought-provoking presentation here. And it's a really great timing to wrap it up now, because this topic has generated many great questions from our audience. So let us get started with the questions then. So we have one audience member, Emil Maracchino here, who works at a college in BC, and he's under the impression that universities and colleges in BC don't think that distance and online learning is the best approach. So we would like to know how you see this. Would it be, do you think this perception would change in the near future? Would the brick and mortar universities ever go irrelevant?
That's an excellent question. And the simple answer is that we don't yet know the answer to it, because everyone's busy talking about the new normal. And it's clear that some institutions cannot wait to get back to their regular classroom teaching. I know that at Acsenda, we were very eager to get back into a sort of hybrid, half the class in the classroom, but then COVID struck again and we had to get out of that. The real interesting part is what will happen when COVID really is just a memory. Will institutions use the expertise that they've acquired and the convenience that they've acquired for students by having developed online learning to continue doing some of that? Only time will tell. I very much doubt whether many campus institutions will convert to being online institutions for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which they've got a huge investment in building. And another one might be that they are competing then head on with institutions that have made online learning their speciality. I cited the case of the UK Open University, which is right up there in the very top for quality in the UK. So it's very difficult starting from scratch with small numbers to compete with the kind of quality that a big institution can create by its investment in material systems and so on. The sort of implication that online and distance learning will always be inferior, I think is just a bunch of rubbish and is traditional thinking. You can have good classroom education, you can have awful classroom education, you can have bad distance learning, and you can have excellent distance learning. So first of all, one must try, and that was my emphasis on trying to produce distance learning that's of quality. But the point really is that in these days, particularly post COVID-19, when there are going to be millions of people around the world trying to reskill, retrain, learn new things. I gave you some stats from the United Kingdom. Millions of people have been looking for ways to get new skill sets so that they can get back into the labor force. The large majority of them cannot go to classroom teaching most of the time because they've got family obligations, they're busy, they cannot turn up to classes at set times, even if those are in the evening. So, we have found historically that, of course, the distance teaching operations have served to a very considerable extent people who were constrained from going to campus. I'm thinking not just of people who were working, but they served massive numbers of women, and still do, because women usually, because of their domestic responsibilities, have less opportunities to get out and go to classes, and stuff that is delivered to them is therefore convenient. So I think it's not helpful to try and make blanket distinction between what is better or what is not better. It's a case of deciding what is appropriate given the student's needs, and then making that experience as good as it possibly can be.
Thank you very much. Some of our popular questions in the chat here are from the perspective of workplaces and employability. Do you have any facts on how employers in general respond to their employees' education when it's from the brick and mortar university versus open universities? This is at the point of selection during the hiring process.
Yeah. This is changing very fast. If I go back a few years, obviously when let me talk again about the Open University, started operating in 1970s. I think it probably took 20 years before UK employers started to regard the Open University as a producer of very good graduates. Because I remember when I was there in the 90s, I was beginning to hear employers say to me, look, if I've got two candidates in front of me, one's an Open University graduate and the other's a graduate from a regular university, I will now take the Open University graduate because I know they've got better time management skills, they've got more initiative, they can organize their own lives around that study. So therefore, they've got qualities which are not necessarily directly to do with what they studied, but the way they studied. So I think that horse, if you like, has left the stable. And what's happened, I think, more recently, and I'm talking in the last decade, even the last 5 years, it seems from surveys we hear that employers have become much less focused on the qualifications that people have and on what they can do, for one. And for two, we've seen an absolute explosion of what we call short cycle qualifications or micro credentials that people can acquire very quickly to acquire some specific new skill. And universities, I think, are adapting with some difficulty to this. We've assumed for 1,000 years that a degree means studying for 3 or 4 years. Whereas now people want to pick up skills that they can do in a matter of weeks or months. So there is this burgeoning of micro-credentials, many of them online, so that people can do that. So I think employers' attitudes are changing very fast. When I was a university president, which I was for 17 years, I found that there was quite a disconnect between what the chief executives of companies would tell us about what they wanted in students, and they would carry on about critical thinking and breadth of education and whatever. And the people actually doing the hiring, who were much more interested in seeing people who could hit the ground running and had immediately relevant qualifications. Another aspect of that, going back quite a few years, you were seeing, and you're seeing it even more now, students who've come through conventional university degree programs immediately going back to community colleges to acquire skills that are immediately marketable and that they can get in less time. So this is a very fast moving area, and it's extremely dangerous to make generalizations about what employers think. And what employers think is that they'd like to run their company as well as they possibly can, and finding people who can help them do that is the main priority.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Next here, I will combine two questions from our attendees, John and Santosh here. Both of them seem to be interested about the ways to assess the quality of distance education. When you talk about that, how HR managers can better assess the quality of distance education, are there any KPIs that can be applied to measure quality in this case?
Yes, I'll have to expand a bit on that whole question. First of all, I think the basic point is that there is quality education and there is low quality education. Quality education is quality education no matter what route you go to get to it. So I would argue that quality higher education from an open university is the same as quality higher education from Oxford, Cambridge, or wherever. And indeed, I remember when they did a big reform of higher education in the UK just as I arrived there in 1990. And they were merging all the institutions into a common sort of framework of funding and assessment and whatever, the polytechnics, the universities, everyone else. We argued from the Open Universities perspective, and we argued successfully, that there must be a similar funding regime and a similar quality assurance regime for all institutions. And the government delivered that. So I showed you a chart giving the results. For about 10 years, they had a process of teaching quality assessment. In other words, assessing the quality of the teaching in each discipline by university. And they came up with 6 criteria that teams were sent in to go and look at. I can't remember all 6, but obviously there were learning materials, student support, resources available, counseling resources, and so on. And they gave 4 points for each of these 6 criteria, and the team came in and assessed it. You get 4 points. If you got 4 points for all 6, you got a 24-point score. And of course, the press leapt on this and produced league tables showing who was best and so on and so forth, which is partly what I showed you during the talk. And that showed very clearly that there is no distinction in quality between the means that a thing is taught. One of the most pleasing days in my life was when this quality assessment program announced the results for the program of general engineering. And in that case, the Open University was the only university in the UK that got a full score of 24 out of 24. Now, many people would have said earlier, you cannot teach general engineering at a distance. So I think that's an example that it is silly to try and say, what is good and what is not. Now, having said that good higher education is good higher education, no matter how you achieve it. Clearly, if you are looking at those 6 criteria I talked about, if you're looking at the quality of the learning materials, then you look at different things in a campus university from a distance teaching university, but they should be there to look at. And one of the advantages that I found in distance teaching operations, both here in Canada and elsewhere, is that a lot of what you produce is physical and visible. You can drop the materials on your toe, you can look at the programs, you can test the systems. So in that respect, it is much easier to do quality control than it is in conventional teaching, which is why the whole question of what is quality in conventional classroom higher education has been so controversial and has evolved so slowly. But that's another question. We can come back to it.
Well, let's move to one more question here. So I think it's a good one. It was asked earlier by our attendee, Jaspal Singh. He wants to know what your view is on online education for trades courses, like welding, for example. These courses are so hands-on. How do you teach them online?
Well, it is a general fact that obviously many courses require hands-on, but most courses have a large component of what you might call theoretical knowledge that people need to acquire before they go and do the hands-on. And so a good distance learning system, does not exclude face-to-face and interactive sessions, as I said.
It's like a hybrid?
Yeah, you've got to do both. And obviously you do both in a different way, depending on what the subject is. When I was at Laurentian University in Ontario, we were the first university in Canada to create a distance learning program in midwifery. Now, of course, at first people, you cannot possibly teach midwifery at a distance. But of course you can, because much of what a midwife needs to know before they actually start delivering babies can be learned in distance sessions. But of course, you have to have a whole network of clinics and hospitals in which they can do their practical training. And as we go forward and more people need education and finance is short, it is going to be very important for institutions to use their resources efficiently, and therefore to concentrate the interactive hands-on stuff on the things where it's really necessary, because it is more expensive to provide, and to do a lot of the rest at a distance, which makes it more convenient for those who want to move into these trades and professions.
Okay, great answer. Thank you very much. So another question came from Venu here. He wants to know about the part that students might be possibly missing out on when they don't go to the classroom setting. They lose that face-to-face peer interaction, peer recognition part of the whole education experience. So what would be the impact of that potentially?
Yeah, no, I think that is a real problem, and it's a personal problem to me. I have two grandchildren who are studying in Montreal. One's in third year and is handling it very well because he's sort of used to the setup. But I have a granddaughter in first year, and she's doing very well, but she's finding it lonely and difficult because she went there hoping to meet lots of new people and so on, and that's not happening. So I think that by and large, the older someone is, the more they will take to distance learning. And of course, it depends what their expectations are. Someone who had looked forward to university as a great chance to get out from under their parents and do social things and sex and meet people and all that, is going to be disappointed if they can't do that. Now, that will return, and then people can make a free choice of what they do. So I'd be the last person to tell people not to go to a campus university if that's what they'd like to do. I had a great time when I went to Oxford University. I had an even greater time studying for a doctorate at the University of Paris. It was all great. Since then, I've mostly studied at a distance because that was the only way I could do it. So we've got to get out of this idea that it's one size fits all cookie cutter stuff. There have to be all kinds of opportunities available to people so that they can learn what they want to learn in the way that pleases them in a reasonably efficient manner, so that we don't make them do 2-year courses where a 1-year course would do, and so on.
This is great. So another person is asking a question that involves labs as a part of the education. And I think that's more bringing up on the topic of how we're losing that hands-on subject. I do feel that you did answer it when you talked about the trades courses or midwife courses. But if you have anything to add, particularly about the labs, feel free. Otherwise, we can move on. There are more questions.
Well, this is really a story. In the early days of the Open University, they were determined that right from the start, they would teach technology, science, maths, and everything. So in the first years of the university, they sent out to each student what they called a home experiment kit, which was a box which measured about 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter and contained very sophisticated things that you could do at home in chemistry, geology, physics, sciences, and biology. In fact, part of this in the first year was a sheep's brain for every student, until the British Post Office said that they didn't really like shipping sheep's brains around the country. So, and that became kind of legendary. As time has gone on, of course, more and more experimentation can be done electronically and virtually, although most distance teaching universities that try to offer the scientific and engineering subjects do organize the students into groups to come to laboratories and workshops and places to do that part of the work. It's what I've been saying all along. You've got to get a blend of what is needed. There's no point being absolutist. It all has to happen on campus, or it all has to happen at a distance. So it's a case. One of the good things about distance learning is that it makes you take the education experience that you're wishing to create, divide it into its parts, and then see how you can provide each part in the best possible way. And by the time you've done that, you then put them all back together, and with a bit of luck, you've got quite an effective teaching and learning system.
That's really excellent way to look at it. Thank you so much for that. Next popular question here from Bill. What can you do to keep a student motivated to start an online course and finish successfully? I guess we don't want them to take 25 years to graduate. So what would you do to keep them motivated?
No, I was doing a lot of other things during those 25 years. Basically,
I bet you did.
I did all the coursework, and then I did the internship, and then I moved to Alberta, then I moved somewhere else, whatever. Anyway, so it wasn't until 20 odd years later that I decided I was finish the thesis, because my wife started to bug me about that instead of studying other things. Anyway, so there we were. And that turned out to be a very successful book, so it was all a good experience. But you're quite right that motivation is a very important component in any kind of distance learning. And I mentioned, I think earlier, examples of that the reason that employers are sometimes very interested in people who've studied online is that they believe they have better personal organization skills and so on than those who've just sat in a classroom and absorbed stuff. So a good distance teaching operation, in fact, runs workshops for its students on how do you sort of keep motivated and what are the secrets to that. And simple ones, some of the advice is usually find a place in your house where you feel comfortable studying and can study in reasonable peace, and always go there, so that by going to that particular desk, room, you get into the study mood, rather than trying to study your courses sitting on the television with the rest of the family watching TV. So that's one thing. Many of the students who come into distance learning, and it must be terrifically true this year when so many people are jumping in, are terrified of anything to do with examinations and tests because they haven't taken any for 20, 30 years. So you've got to have workshops and way of training them to understand that is not as scary as it sounds. And you've also got to make sure that the assessments you put in are actually sensible and assess what you want to assess and are not just thought up at the last minute. But I don't in any way deny that it's a problem. And often you find that when students in distance learning programs drop out or pause out, it's not because they're lazy and slack, it's because they're adults who have jobs and all the problems that adults have, especially right now with COVID-19. Will I keep my job? You know, can I pay my mortgage? Is my marriage breaking up? All these sorts of things, which obviously distract from giving attention full time to your studies. So one must expect, and it's not just online, any type of part-time study will have a higher dropout rate than the kind of study you do when you go and live on campus and do your studying there. But that's just something we have to deal with.
I think it would be a nice transition here. You mentioned COVID-19 situation, and our next attendee here is asking about that. Afzal Minhas wants to know how online learning has affected the mental and physical health of the students during COVID-19, and what academia is doing to support them.
Well, I think this is something that has varied very much by time. Certainly we found at Acsenda that at the beginning it was very tough. I have to say that most of the students at Acsenda are from overseas. They were landing in a strange country, in a strange city, and suddenly bang, instead of sort of having the classroom in which they could meet each other and get a bit socialized, they were being kept at home and studying online. And that was very difficult, which is why I mentioned in my talk that Acsenda put a lot of effort into creating virtual social things. What's been interesting, I think, is that as time has gone on, and I mean not much time, as the time has gone on from March when we started until now, I'm being told that the students look much less to the institution for help with their social and cultural lives. They found ways of doing that themselves, and therefore they're much more pragmatic and want the institution to help them with their studies and everything related to that. And that's, I think, a general phenomenon. Adult students, the kind of students we had at the Open University, frankly, didn't really look to us to provide exciting social life and cultural events. They have that in the communities they live in and the hobbies they have and so on and so forth. But certainly, I'm on a group at the moment that is studying a potential reform of the whole university system in Alberta. And the two students on the group I'm working with have constantly been stressing the need for institutions to provide more support for mental health because many students are finding it very tough. That actually is part of a general trend that the level of mental problems among students seems to be much higher today than it was 10 years ago, than it was 20 years ago. So there's underlying trend here, which COVID-19 obviously has done nothing to help. What I would say too is that you've got to be, and I said this in the talk partly, I think institutions have got to be very careful about how deep they get into helping students with mental problems and mental illnesses, because it's very easy for an institution to get out of its depth when these are problems that often require proper professional attention. So I think what academia can do to support them in the simplest way is simply to maintain a lot of communication with the students, both collectively and individually, and show them that they are part of an exciting enterprise, that someone cares about them, that this will not be forever, and that the institution will help them achieve their objectives as much as it possibly can.
Great, thank you very much. So the next two questions, I think I can combine them here because they're linking it back to the business world now. Universities were early adopters of online communication platforms. And why do you think businesses fell behind in adopting online communication tools? And if possible, can we talk about how these concepts of online communication and education tools can be applied to employee and customer education?
That's an interesting question. I'm not actually sure I agree with the premise. It seemed to me that business and so on got into online and distance communication and meetings, long before universities were doing it. Most universities, it's only in these very recent times that they've what my friend Tony Bates called crashed into online learning, because that's what they had to do. Whereas, going back to the 70s, I can remember taking place in frequent pan-Canadian telephone conferences and so on. So I think that it's everyone is doing it. Just this morning I was reading about this G20 virtual summit, which apparently was a bit of a flop because there wasn't much vim to it, and Trump was off playing golf, and so was Erdogan, and so was Putin. It wasn't. They compared it interestingly to 2009, when the G20 that met after that, with Gordon Brown, the British Prime Minister, chairing it, really made a contribution to bringing an end to that financial crash. I was told, reading the paper this morning, that this recent effort organized by the Saudi Arabians did nothing really except just reinforce old platitudes. So in that regard, our governments are probably not very good at this yet. But I think there's been lots of online by businesses services, and I think in many ways there will be more of that in the future relative to the work to be done than there will be in universities, because until we get the airline systems up and running again, I think businesses are going to continue to use working from home, use distance meetings in a very big way, whereas many universities can't get their people back on campus fast enough.
That is true, thank you. So the next person here is introducing a couple of concepts. They want to know, how do you enact the best practice of active learning? Example he's giving is think, pair, share to online learning. And does using a flipped classroom strategy work in online learning?
Yes, well, flipped classroom was one of these sort of buzzwords and fashions that came. Flipped classrooms in many ways is what distance education has always been doing, in that you expect the student to study the key material independently, either reading it, viewing it, listening to it, or whatever, and then to come in and talk about it. So I would say the flipped classroom strategy really has always been the distance and online learning strategy. So to that extent, the conventional systems are really just catching up with that. I haven't done much or been much in classrooms where they tried that, but I would have thought it was just like what a distance learner is used to.
Great. So for most PhD programs, they're saying that research is more important. So how do universities outsource the best possible quality instructors?
Well, that's been a historic problem forever and is not going away at the moment. It's true, most people who teach in universities have had no training for teaching. The training they've had was to do research and get their PhDs. Moreover, to make it worse, when they get into the universities, there's huge pressure on them to put as much time as they can into their research, to publish, to pull down grants, and so on. Some countries, I think of the UK, I think of Australia, have introduced programs to teach university teachers to teach better. And these have had some success. I mentioned, and you may have sort of picked up by implication when I talked about distance teaching universities who don't use their full-time faculty to do the tutoring, but hire people from outside who are often actually teachers at other universities, but bring these people in to do the tutoring. But the first thing that they do is to train these tutors to tutor and not to teach. Because the tendency, if you are hired as a tutor for a group of students, is to go in and start teaching them, you know, your version of what it is you thought they're trying to learn. And you've got to train them out of that to actually start from where the students are and deal with the questions and the misunderstandings that the students have. Thing is that when people have adapted to that, they actually, many of them find it more exciting and interesting than actually standing in front of the class and giving their lecture. So I think that if you're trying to do distance learning at scale, then you should seriously think about having part-time people to do some of that tutoring. And in industry, I would imagine that a lot of the actual training to use equipment to do services is best done by people who are actually at the coalface doing that in their day-to-day jobs.
We have not too much time left, and we have a couple of more questions here. Maybe you can briefly answer this one. You did mention in your presentation that we have 2 online universities in Canada, but we also have University of Fredericton in New Brunswick. Do you have any comment on UFred? You never mentioned it.
I've never taken a course from UFred, okay. But I'm well aware that even before COVID-19, many universities were offering distance courses alongside their conventional offerings. I mean, I was president of Laurentian University in Ontario back in the 80s, and we already then had an extensive program of distance learning. In those days, it was more, if you like, correspondence education and than it was online, because there weren't too many computers around in those days. But no, many universities have been doing this. Waterloo, to its great credit, as well as becoming a powerhouse of computing and math, from the very early days had an extensive correspondence education program. And I think that was a very unusual thing for them to do, but they've gained greatly by it. And certainly we would send Laurentian students to do summer courses with Waterloo by correspondence to sort of get extra credits. So it's a mixed economy. All I would say is that if you're going to do distance education, take it seriously. You cannot just do it sort of on the back of an envelope as an afterthought after 5 o'clock in the evening. So the online universities like Teluk and like Athabasca have an advantage because that is their only business. So they make sure they do it well. And it's quite difficult for the reasons I said in the last question, because the faculty in most universities are being pressured to do more and more research. It is quite difficult to get all of the faculty to give their serious attention to putting courses online in any permanent way.
Okay, great. Sir John, next question Let's see if you can answer it in one word. If there are still people hesitant to try remote education, what is one top benefit that you can summarize for them?
Convenient.
Try. Great. Thank you so much. Such a brief and great response. We have other comments from our audience members. They're thanking you for your excellent insights. They're telling us that you give them a lot of food for thought. And this might be me being a little bit greedy here, but I did save a couple of minutes at the end just to ask you this one question I wanted to ask. And I hope you'll be willing to answer it, because it's not about education, it's more about you. So actually I have to admit that you are the first sir I have met in my lifetime. And I'm curious about one thing. I know you've been carrying this title ever since Queen Elizabeth knighted you over a quarter of a century ago. And can you tell us, how did this experience change your life before and after? Is there anything like that you can share with us?
It's actually quite difficult to say. And let me tell you a bit about the process. First of all, in those days, it was a very mysterious process. These sort of honors just dropped on you. Nowadays, both in Britain and in Canada, for the Order of Canada, you can propose people and then there's a whole committee that looks at it and so on and so forth. But in those days, it was just, it was a complete surprise when I came into my office one lunchtime and found my staff all very excited and said, look, you've got this letter from the Prime Minister's office, which says that the Queen wants to give you a knighthood. And so I went home. My wife was terrified because she had American citizenship and wasn't sure whether she was allowed to be a lady. But we got through that. What was interesting in the letter was it said, please indicate on the attached form whether you will accept this honor if offered. You will receive no further communication from us until the list is published. So you sort of fill in this form and post it, and then you wonder whether you tick the right box and so on and so forth. Anyway, and then you go to a ceremony at Buckingham Palace where the Queen has it, as you might have seen in movies, has a sword and taps you on both shoulders and talks to you and so on. Since then, it's been interesting. In Britain, obviously, people call me Sir John and so on. After that, I moved to UNESCO, the United Nations. And in the United Nations system, all titles are abandoned. Everyone is Mr. or Ms., whatever your title. So I became Mr. Daniel in UNESCO for a few years. But then I came back to Canada and joined the Commonwealth of Learning, which is a Commonwealth organization. And being Commonwealth, they said, oh, it's wonderful that you're Sir John. We must use that title. So they did, and actually it's stuck with me ever since, even though perhaps I shouldn't be using it in Canada. But I've never really tried to get a reservation at a restaurant that was to be full and pulled that, because I don't like pulling things, pulling rank or anything. But no, it's been very pleasing, and I'm equally pleased to have been made an officer of the Order of Canada some years ago, and also a similar honor in France. So it's very pleasing when these things come. So thank you for asking that question. Thank you for being such a wonderful moderator, Mattel. I think
thank you for being such a great speaker. I'm just surprised that you were caught by surprise when you got the title, because it was given to you for all your multiple contributions to the field of advancing higher education, open and distance education. So I thought maybe you have seen it coming or something like that.
Well, I'd only been in the UK for 4 years when it happened. So it genuinely was a big surprise, because I didn't think they knew enough about me to do that. But whatever, it's history. And as you say, it's been 25 years since that happened.
Well, thank you very much. We really are honored to have you here, and what a great discussion. I don't have time to read those to you, but our audience members are sending you great feedback, and you gave them food for thought and many good ideas to think about for them and for their children. Someone's child is about to graduate from high school, and they're writing to us that you gave them some good food for thought.
Yeah, difficult time to graduate from high school. I wish them very, very well success.
I'm sure it's much needed. Thanks a lot here. And everybody in the audience, I really appreciate you asking the questions. If you feel that I've missed your question, didn't get to it, feel free to contact us, and we'll do our best to get your question to Sir John to see if it can be answered at a later point. I really appreciate everyone's time again. Thanks for joining us, sticking with us for the second day, and please do join the next session as well. We have more excellent speakers coming today. Thank you. And now it's over to you, Tracy Ann.
Thank you, Natella, and thank you all to our attendees for coming to this session. We'd love to hear your feedback.